40% more. That couldn't possibly be right. I stared at my monitor, blinking slowly, waiting for the figures to rearrange themselves into something logical. They never did. No matter how many times I refreshed the screen, the compensation spreadsheet Kyle from HR had mistakenly blasted to the entire finance department instead of just the executive team stayed fixed in front of me, glowing like an accusation. Each row hit harder than the last. Mason Reeves, 2 years with the company. Base salary $137,000. Vanessa Lynn, 14 months employed. Base salary $134,500. Tristan Adler, 8 months in. Base salary $142,000. Every single one of them had been trained by me. I felt my throat tighten as my eyes dropped to the bottom of the column and did the math again, though I already knew the answer. Nearly 40% more than my own salary of $98,750. After 9 years of building this company's entire financial backbone from nothing, the noise of the office dissolved around me. Keyboards clacked somewhere far away. Low conversations blurred into a dull murmur. The HVAC system hummed relentlessly, always set a few degrees too cold, just like every other day I'd spent here. I scrolled again, hands numb, until I found my name tucked unceremoniously onto page 3. Eleanor Avery, 9 years at the company. Base salary $98,750. 9 years. 9 years of 60-hour weeks untangling impossible equations, catching errors no one else even thought to look for, designing compliance systems that saved the company millions, and personally training every employee who now earns vastly more than I did. I glanced across the open floor toward Mason, who was laughing at something on his screen, probably another stupid crypto meme. Mason, who still needed my help reconciling accounts payable after 2 years on the job. Mason, who earned almost $40,000 more than me. Kyle's frantic recall email landed 3 minutes later, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. I downloaded the file and saved it to my personal drive. I shut my laptop, stood up, and walked straight toward Daniel Hammond's office. 6 years he'd been my manager. I didn't book time on his calendar. I didn't send a message. I knocked twice and stepped in as soon as he looked up. "Eleanor, is this urgent?" he asked, irritation already creeping into his voice. I placed my laptop on his desk, open to the spreadsheet. "I need you to explain this." My voice sounded calm, hollow even. Daniel's eyes flicked down, then back to me. The slight widening of his pupils told me everything I needed to know. He closed the laptop, leaned back in his chair, and stapled his fingers. "You know I can't discuss other employees' compensation." "I'm not asking about theirs," I said, reopening the screen. "I'm asking about mine. 9 years, Daniel. 9 years of building every financial system this company relies on. I trained all of these people who now make 40% more than I did. How does that happen?" He let out that familiar managerial sigh, the kind designed to make you feel unreasonable for even asking. "The market has changed significantly since you were hired, Eleanor. Your compensation was set in a very different economic climate. New hires come in at market rate." "Then adjust it," I replied evenly. He shrugged. Actually shrugged. "There are bands, structures, policies. It's not that simple. Take it or leave it." My hands trembled, but not from fear. Something sharper had taken its place. "I'd like to request a formal compensation review." "I can submit it," he said, glancing at his watch, "but it'll be denied. We just finished annual reviews last quarter. You already received your standard 3% increase. Was there anything else?" That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even call my sister Meredith. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started writing. I'm Ellie, by the way. Eleanor Avery, 34 years old, the kind of person who alphabetizes her spice rack and color codes her closet, the kind of employee always labeled detail-oriented and thorough, which is corporate shorthand for, "We'll give you twice the workload because you won't let anything break." Let me pause for a moment before I go on. If you're reading this, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to know this story reached you wherever you are. And if you've ever felt undervalued, maybe leave a heart, because what I'm about to tell you changed everything for me. Maybe it will for you too. So there I was, sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of grocery store Cabernet, drafting the most important document of my career. I built a timeline of my 9 years at the company. 2014, hired as a financial analyst. Built the first automated reporting system, eliminating 30 hours of manual work every week. 2015, promoted to senior analyst. Restructured accounts receivable, reducing outstanding collections by 42%. 2016, designed a tax compliance framework that passed a federal audit with 0 findings, the first clean audit in company history. I documented everything, every crisis I prevented, every dollar I saved, every system I created, every employee I trained who now earns vastly more than I did. I worked through the night with a cold, razor-sharp clarity I'd never experienced before. By sunrise, I had completed a 43-page analysis titled The Cost of Institutional Memory. On the final page, I calculated exactly how much I had saved the company in the past year alone, $267,459, compared to the $39,500 adjustment required to bring my salary to market rate. The math wasn't complicated. I printed the document and had it professionally bound at a 24-hour copy shop. Then I went home, showered, and dressed in my best outfit, a charcoal pencil skirt and cream blouse I'd bought after my last promotion 3 years ago. When I arrived at the office, I went straight to CEO Garrett Wilson's office. His assistant Tara hadn't arrived yet. It was only 7:15 a.m. I slipped inside and placed 3 items neatly on his desk: my resignation letter, an offer letter from a competing firm offering $145,000 plus benefits, and my leather-bound analysis. Then I went to my desk and worked as if it were any ordinary day. At 9:30, my phone rang. Garrett's extension. "Eleanor, could you come to my office?" His voice was tight. I walked deliberately across the floor, whispers rippling around me. The spreadsheet had spread. When I entered his office, Daniel was there, along with Kyle from HR and Vanessa Chen, the COO. My analysis lay open on Garrett's desk. "Close the door," he said. I stayed standing even when he gestured to the chair. He tapped the leather cover. "We've reviewed your document. It's thorough." "Thank you." "There seems to be a misunderstanding about compensation," Kyle said nervously. "No misunderstanding. I worked here 9 years. I trained 5 employees who now make 40% more than me. When I raised the issue, I was told it was policy. I'm simply responding with a business decision." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "If you'd given us time," I interrupted. "For 9 years." I pointed out the final section of my analysis. There's a complete knowledge transfer plan. Every process, workaround, and system vulnerability that exists only in my head, organized by department and impact. Vanessa finally spoke. "You've clearly put thought into this."
"I have," Garrett said, leaning forward. "What would it take for you to reconsider your resignation?" "My market value is already established," I said calmly, "but this isn't just about money. I'd need my salary adjusted to $150,000, retroactive compensation as a bonus, and a formal company-wide review of pay equity." Kyle gasped. Daniel stared at the floor. Garrett studied me in silence before nodding. "Give us 24 hours. "My resignation is effective in 2 weeks, I replied. "The knowledge transfer plan requires 60 days. You have 24 hours to decide." As I turned to leave, Vanessa asked, "Who made the competing offer?" "Horizon Financial Solutions," I said, "led by Catherine Walsh." The recognition on their faces was instant. I walked back to my desk, heart pounding but steps steady. The power had shifted. For the first time in 9 years, I wasn't just Eleanor, the dependable financial architect. I was Eleanor, a force they could no longer ignore. As I sat down, my phone lit up with a message from Catherine. "Did you do it?" I typed back one word: "Yes." Her reply came instantly. "Their loss, our gain. Dinner tonight." I smiled. The real victory wasn't finally standing up for myself. It was what came next, because the most valuable secret of all hadn't made it into my analysis. I looked around the office that had been my second home for nearly a decade. The burnt coffee smell, the uneven hum of the air conditioner, the city skyline outside the windows. All familiar, all suddenly different. My computer pinged. A message from Jordan in accounts receivable. "What's happening? Everyone's saying you quit." News traveled fast in an office built for eavesdropping. I minimized the message without replying and opened the file I'd been quietly working on for months. Not my analysis, but something else entirely.
When I said I documented everything in those 9 years, I meant everything. The first irregular transaction had caught my eye 18 months earlier, a vendor payment that didn't match any approved purchase order, small enough to slip under the radar, $13,975, to a consulting firm I'd never heard of. I flagged it to Daniel, who dismissed it as pre-approved by executive leadership. She knows. That was the moment I realized Catherine had anticipated everything, down to the NDA. When I'd first met her 6 months ago, she didn't pitch me with money or titles. She said, "When you're ready to walk away, make sure you take the truth with you." I hadn't understood what she meant then. Now I did. The next morning, I arrived early. The office was unusually quiet. The calm before a storm only I knew was coming. I uploaded my final documentation to both company and personal encrypted drives, making sure timestamps matched official access logs. Then I printed one copy. Not for them, for me. By noon, Thomas emailed the NDA draft. I read every word slowly. Section 3B. The employee agrees to withhold disclosure of any financial discrepancies, accounting irregularities, or undocumented transactions observed during employment. There it was, the buried confession. They'd written it themselves. I replied simply, "Language under Section 3B requires clarification regarding legality of non-disclosure in cases of confirmed fraud. Please advise." 10 minutes later, Daniel appeared at my desk, sweating through his collar. "Garrett wants to see you." Of course he did. In the conference room, Garrett's patience had evaporated. "Eleanor, this phrasing, it's standard. There's no need to escalate this." I kept my tone even. "Then legal should have no problem clarifying it." Thomas interjected, "This discussion is internal, no need to involve outside counsel." I closed my notebook deliberately. "Then I'll hold my signature until it is clarified." The silence that followed was electric. Garrett finally exhaled. "Take the afternoon off. We'll revisit tomorrow." I stood, smiled faintly. "Thank you. I will." That evening, Catherine met me at a quiet restaurant 2 blocks from Horizon's office. She was already seated, wine glass in hand, that knowing smile on her face. "They took the bait, didn't they?" she asked. I nodded. "They're scrambling to contain it." "Good," she said softly. "Then it's time." From her bag, she slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were Horizon's onboarding documents and a formal request from their legal team to provide expert testimony in an upcoming case involving financial misconduct at my former company. My heart pounded. "You were never just an employee," Catherine said. "You were the witness they never saw coming." I exhaled slowly, realizing this was more than a career move. It was justice, long overdue. The next morning, I submitted my official acceptance to Horizon and my formal resignation to Garrett, effective immediately. Attached was a single-page note addressed to the board. Attached are findings related to unverified vendor transactions spanning 3 fiscal years. Further details will be provided to federal investigators upon request. Then I powered down my workstation for the last time. As I walked out, the sunlight hit the glass walls just right. And for the first time, the reflection staring back at me wasn't the quiet, overworked architect they'd underestimated. It was the woman who had finally balanced the ledger. And in that moment, I knew they hadn't just lost their best analyst, they'd lost their shield and their silence. Proceed as planned. The next 2 weeks were fascinating. I was suddenly included in executive meetings I'd previously only prepared materials for. People who had barely nodded at me in the hallway now stopped to chat. Daniel brought me coffee, black, no sugar, just how I liked it without being asked. I signed their revised offer letter, but kept finding issues with the confidentiality agreement, sending it back to legal with questions that required careful wording, a delaying tactic Catherine had suggested. "The document isn't legally problematic," I explained to my sister Meredith over dinner that weekend. "I'm just buying time." Meredith shook her head, twirling pasta around her fork. "I still can't believe you're doing this. The old Ellie would have just taken the money and been grateful." I set down my wine glass. The old Ellie let herself be undervalued for 9 years. The new Ellie understands her worth, and the new Ellie is kind of terrifying. Meredith laughed. "I love it." For those wondering what happened, because I know you're wondering, let me be clear. I didn't break any laws. I didn't steal company secrets. I didn't sabotage systems. What I did do was much more effective. On day 15, one day after my resignation would have taken effect, I sat across from Garrett, Daniel, Vanessa, and Thomas again. This time, we were joined by Amara Jackson, chair of the board, connecting by video conference. "Eleanor, thank you for your patience as we've worked through the details of your new role," Garrett began, smiling that CEO smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Before we finalize everything, there's something I need to share with all of you," I said, pulling a slim folder from my bag. "We've already approved your requests," Daniel interjected quickly. "This isn't about my compensation." I opened the folder and distributed copies of a 15-page document to everyone at the table, sending the digital version to Amara. "This is about the $2.7 million that's been systematically diverted from the company through fake vendor accounts over the past 3 years."
The room went completely silent. On the screen, Amara leaned forward, eyes narrowing as she scanned the document. "I have detailed the transaction patterns, the shell companies involved, and traced the funds to their final destination," I said calmly, professionally. I initially flagged these inconsistencies to Daniel 18 months ago, but was told they were approved at the executive level. All eyes turned to Daniel, whose face had gone ashen. "There must be some mistake," he stammered. "No mistake," I continued. "I verified every transaction. The pattern became clear after tracking the first dozen payments. What wasn't clear was who was behind it." I turned to page 12 of my report. "The money was carefully dispersed across 7 different LLC entities, all traced back to a holding company called Pinewood Ventures." I paused. "A holding company registered to Thomas Whitaker's brother-in-law." Thomas's expression didn't change, but his knuckles went white as he gripped the table. "This is absurd," he said evenly. "I've never heard of Pinewood Ventures." "Perhaps not by name," I agreed, "but the signature authorizing the formation documents matches the signature on your marriage certificate to Claire Whitaker. Nay, Peterson, your brother-in-law, Jordan Peterson, signed both." On the screen, Amara's voice cut through the tension. "Miss Avery, these are extremely serious allegations. Why bring this to us rather than the authorities?" I met her gaze. "Because I believe in giving this company the opportunity to address the situation internally first. The fraud has been sophisticated but contained. It appears to involve only a small number of individuals, not systemic corruption." What I didn't say was that Catherine had advised this approach. "Let them think you're doing them a favor," she told me. "Give them just enough rope to hang themselves." "I'll need to call in our outside counsel," Amara said, already reaching for her phone. Thomas stood abruptly. "This meeting is over until legal representation for all parties is present." "Sit down, Thomas," Garrett said quietly, eyes never leaving the documents. "Eleanor, how long have you been compiling this information?" 18 months, since the first time I reported an irregular payment and was ignored." Daniel looked like he might be sick. I didn't. "You never asked questions," I finished for him. "You never investigated when I raised concerns. You trusted the wrong people and dismissed the right ones." The next 8 hours were a blur. Emergency board calls, outside counsel arriving, security escorting Thomas from the building, and forensic accountants being brought in. I answered questions calmly, provided all my documentation, and watched as the company I'd devoted 9 years to grappled with the betrayal of its trusted legal counsel. By midnight, it was clear Thomas had been the architect of the scheme, with 2 accomplices in the accounting department who had helped process the fraudulent payments. Daniel hadn't been complicit, just negligent and too trusting of Thomas, who had assured him the payments were legitimate, executive-approved consultancy fees. I left the building at 1:17 a.m., exhausted but eerily calm. Catherine was waiting in her car across the street. "How did it go?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "Exactly as you predicted. Thomas is finished, the board is in panic mode, Garrett and Vanessa are scrambling to contain the damage." Catherine smiled in the darkness. "And you?" "I start as your new chief financial officer next month as agreed, with a signing bonus matching what they embezzled from their own company." I leaned back against the headrest. "But first, I'm taking 3 weeks off. I haven't had a real vacation in 9 years." "What happened after that?"
Well, that's when things got really interesting. The company tried to keep the embezzlement quiet, but these things have a way of getting out. Within days, Thomas and his accomplices were facing criminal charges. Daniel was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into his oversight failures. The board brought in an independent firm to conduct a complete audit of all financial systems I had built and knew inside and out. 2 days before I was set to start my new role at Catherine's company, Garrett called me personally. "Eleanor, I'm hoping we can talk." His voice had lost that CEO confidence. "The audit team is struggling with some of the systems you designed. They're finding it challenging to understand your methodology." I almost laughed. My methodology is fully documented in the knowledge transfer plan I provided, the one you ignored when you thought you could simply pay me to stay quiet. "We're prepared to offer you a consulting fee to assist with the transition. Name your price." "My price?" I echoed. My price was being valued fairly for 9 years of loyalty and expertise. That opportunity had passed. I hung up and blocked his number. When I walked into Catherine's office on my first day as CFO, she greeted me with a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," she toasted, "and to knowing your worth," I added. Within 6 months, we had secured 3 major clients who had left my former company due to concerns about their financial controls. Within a year, our firm had doubled in size and was recognized as an industry leader in transparent financial practices. I implemented a company-wide transparent compensation structure that ensured equal pay for equal work regardless of hire date. Every quarter, I personally reviewed salary data to identify and correct any emerging disparities. As for my former employer, they survived but never fully recovered from the scandal. Garrett was eventually removed by the board. Vanessa left for a position at a smaller firm. Daniel was demoted to a non-management role after the investigation concluded he was negligent but not criminal. The company was acquired 2 years later at a fraction of its previous valuation. Sometimes I wonder if things would have been different had they simply valued me properly from the beginning, if Daniel had investigated when I first raised concerns, if Garrett had built a culture of transparency rather than secrecy. But the truth is, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. So if you're watching this and feeling undervalued, overlooked, or taken for granted, whether at work, in a relationship, or anywhere else in your life, remember my story. Remember that knowing your worth isn't selfish, it's necessary. Your institutional knowledge, your dedication, your skills, they all have value, real, tangible value, and sometimes you have to be the one to calculate that value and present the bill.